Great. All right, so we asked Pono to join us today for the Backdrop Live session, Software Freedom Conservancy. Software Freedom Conservancy is currently our fiscal and legal sponsor, so they make it so that we can focus on the code and the project of Backdrop without having to worry about how to file our taxes or run a nonprofit organization or any of the other stuff that might be problematic for a group of developers who just want to work on code. And so I don't know, Pono, if you'd like to maybe introduce yourself, your time with SFC, a little overview of what the Conservancy does, and then yeah, he's got some cool updates to tell us about what they're working on right now.
Yeah, sure. I'm Pono. I've been with Conservancy for a little bit over a year now. I help do community organizing for Conservancy and social media and some other efforts. I used to be a software engineer and have moved into a more non-technical role, so I've been excited to work on that. And yeah, I prepared a couple paragraphs about kind of just an update. So if that sounds good, then cool. Yeah, so we've been staffing up. So we're currently at 6.5 employees, which is the largest the organization's ever been. We're also growing in projects, so those are sort of two tensions. But we're really hopeful that we're able to handle more tasks and keep up with some of the things than we've been able to in the past. We've got a chat service, so we're on IRC and XMPP. I've put a bunch of links into the Google Doc for people to reference afterwards, so feel free to hit those up. We're also focusing on making a lot more material for people outside of the normal free software movement. I think that's been a real that's been a difficulty for us communicating in the past, is just letting people know that software freedom's for everybody, not just for developers and free software developers particularly. So we made a new introduction video to kind of what we do, and we're really excited about that and think that it really communicates a lot of the ideas that we hold dear to the general public. So like I mentioned before, we're working with Outreachy. So Outreachy is a Conservancy project, and they provide internships for historically excluded people. Right now, in this May session, we had over 468 people apply for 66 internship spots. So this is one of the biggest rounds we've ever had. And at the end of this session, we'll have had a total of over 900 internships for students and people all over the world, which is really great. There's a couple other initiatives like that. One of the other ones that just expanded is the Institute for Computing and Research. They just expanded to Austin, Texas. They've previously been based in Santa Fe for the past 6 years, and last year they were in Portland, Oregon. They have, I think, about roughly 20 students this year that are participating. And that's a really cool program for high school students to get involved in scientific research. The idea there is basically connections to labs and other things have really been only offered to a privileged class. And so this is connecting high school students from other backgrounds with these research opportunities, and they use free software to develop some of those skills. We're excited about like the return of in-person conferences, although, you know, COVID's always changing. So I'll be down in Scale in LA at the end of the month. So if anybody's around for that, please come say hi. And so with that, we've sort of been amending our travel policy, and as the situation's developing, we're talking to other folks, and you know, Backdrop is leading the way on how to do an online conference. So it's really cool to see. Some other updates are, so we've got the lawsuit against Vizio. The idea here is that we're opening a new legal path for end users to be able to be treated as equal parties in use of the GPL. So the idea is that a third-party beneficiary is an end user. In the past, we've typically only been able to bring copyright cases with people that have written code, not consumers of code, but we think that users are just as an equal participant as developers when it comes to this. So we had a preliminary hearing in May, and that went really well. And so as things develop, we're excited to keep everybody apprised. Yeah, and then the other campaign that we just announced a couple weeks ago is this Give Up GitHub campaign. After a year of trying to get into contact with Microsoft and talking to everybody there and at GitHub, they've got a product called Copilot, which has consumed all of this code on GitHub and uses machine learning as a trained algorithm to produce new code. And Microsoft's assertion is that this is that the copyright belongs to the user that used Copilot. However, we take issue with this because we think that public licensed code belongs under the license and needs to be treated as such. And so this is sort of a long string, the last event in a long string of things where we've been trying to talk with Microsoft and GitHub about their politic around these things. And so we're asking projects to move off of GitHub. I think one of the parts that really made me concerned about the campaign was sort of the nuance around who's able to leave and who's not able to leave. GitHub offers so many gratis services for CI, for static sites, for code hosting, all of these really nice services for developers. And so if you're a new developer, it's great to be able to just jump in and have all the tooling. But this is sort of like a problem we've seen over the years where companies will donate resources to free software projects, and then you're enticed for a couple years. But then once the free credits run out, now you're sort of locked into this walled garden of products. We've seen this recently with the canceling of cloud computing storage and cloud computing resources for a lot of conservancy projects, where they've been on certain cloud hosters with free resources. But after a few years, the credits run dry, and now you've got this huge both engineering and financial cost to get off of the service, and it's a really big problem. So we're using this as sort of a point to build up resources outside to be able to host free, both freeze and beer and freeze and speech services for projects, so that we're not relying on corporate development platforms. I think that's kind of a nice update, and I'm curious if there's any questions or anything that people wanted to talk about in regards to that. I know that particularly the GitHub campaign, people have a lot of thoughts on, and so I'd love to be able to hear concerns and hear what people were thinking about that. So one thing I would like to add is that we're not asking any of our projects to get off of GitHub. We know that you know what's best for your communities, and this is really a public campaign to talk more about the issue more openly. And as we've drawn sort of these lines in the sand, we realize that not all of our projects are going to agree with us, and we do welcome the conversation and want to make sure that there's no pressure or no feelings of animosity there. We support you in your decision.
Yeah, the GitHub thing came as a little bit of a surprise to me because before Microsoft bought GitHub, or maybe I should say when Microsoft bought GitHub, everybody was surprised that Microsoft was like being a good open source player, which was sort of a shock. And so I stopped paying attention. And now here we are a few years later, it's like, oh, actually, no, they are just still doing what they're doing. But yeah, so like, that's too bad. I had a lot of hope there that Microsoft was going to be the good guy. I was like, come on, this is great.
Yeah, and I think that I think that's a really good point, because like I think that it's a really nuanced issue that like I think it's important for us to take a harder stance, but I do think that it is important to recognize that they have been doing a lot more efforts in development with open source over the past, let's say 5 years versus what their opinion was in the late 90s and early 2000s.
Yeah, and especially with an organization that big, change is probably really slow, and there's probably a lot of people inside who don't understand open source, and so I think it's important to put pressure on, and maybe they'll come around. I don't know. It did definitely make Tim and I really nervous when we first saw that, though, because Backdrop is itself so heavily invested in GitHub. GitHub was one of the reasons that we were able to fork the project, because we didn't need to worry about infrastructure. Drupal was around before GitHub, and they did have to build all of their infrastructure themselves from scratch. And that was a huge expense in resource sink for developers who could have been working on the project. So the fact that we were able to just sort of get up and go without that was really beneficial to Backdrop. We've also found a lot of benefit in just being where all the developers are. We get a lot of people who maybe were interested in learning GitHub and didn't really have a reason to do so until they came along to Backdrop, and they said, oh, well, I wanted to learn that anyway. And so it doesn't seem like an extra cost as part of the learning curve. Whereas if we had asked them to learn a patch workflow or even something in like Subversion or Mercurial or whatever, it would have been something they're like, no, I'm not really interested in learning that. And it's another thing that turns off. But because GitHub is so ubiquitous, it's something that's more of an advantage, even if it's part of the learning curve. We also get a bunch of people who are already GitHub aficionados, just grab good first issues and contribute to our project, even if they know nothing about it, just because they want to work on open source. And so that's something that we also benefit a lot from, not having to do as much outreach in order to find people to work on our projects. So yeah, there's a lot of things that immediately come up as, oh no, if we have to get on GitHub, it's going to be so much work, so much more work for us. But it is definitely something to keep in mind, especially when it comes to not treating the open source licenses the way they're supposed to be treated, because that's something that's really important to us. Obviously, being a project that was able to fork because of the license, we still, have that license. We understand some of the nuance about, having software become infected with the license of its parent software, just with the nature of Backdrop plus all of its modules. So yeah, thinking about how a big organization might choose to not respect that is something that we need to sort of consider about where we would stand on something like that. So
Yeah.
excellent.
Yeah, I think your comments about like GitHub giving you the tools to be able to fork and build a community, I think that's a really, really good one. And I think that, like, of course these are valuable tools, and so I think that that's definitely an aspect of the problem, that it's great to hear that people have been able to build that community, and the issue with newcomers, I think, is a really, really good one. So I really appreciate that, because yeah, for such a big community that you've built and been able to maintain, I think that GitHub really did allow you to do that, which is something that should be recognized.
Something that I think, oh, sorry, you go ahead, Arena.
I put it in chat as well. How would GitHub compare to GitLab, which has self-hosting option?
Yeah, so I think like technically there are a lot of comparable equivalents, like if you're just looking at features. But the thing that GitHub gives us is, number one, that everybody already has a GitHub account. Well, maybe not everybody, lots of developers are already there, where like I think I have a GitLab account, but it was part of some client project that I was on a long time ago. Like I don't have my own stuff over. It's just not quite the same. And then like when we go to participate in things like Open Source Day, like events tangentially related to something, their requirements are like, you have to have a list of issues on GitHub that's already curated for whatever, and we don't actually have to do any work when we do that, because we already have all of the stuff in that place. So just because everyone else is using it, it's yeah, I don't know how else to say that, but when everybody's in one place, it's really easy for that to become the standard for everything in the future. And so then if you're not on that platform, you're like, well, now we have to build something over there just to do this event, or to do this project, or to do this open source day, or do the sprint, or whatever it is, or how do I share my stuff with someone who's not on GitLab or Bitbucket or whatever other tool we chose. So there's like brand recognition and outside, like communities outside of our own on the platform that are really valuable. We've also built a lot of custom integration with GitHub, maybe not a lot, some custom integration with GitHub that we would just need to reinvest that into whatever other platform we chose. There's like a small technical cost there in just not just moving, but also reintegrating in various ways. Like our project system is all integrated with all of the releases and stuff the way they come out on GitHub and their APIs. So yeah, there's just some cost there. But yeah, I think technically there are a lot of platforms that are equivalent in terms of what they offer. There are probably some platforms that offer better features that might be a better fit for us, but the community aspect and the brand recognition, I think, outweigh the technical benefits we might get from a different option.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of tooling that exists to move from GitHub to GitLab or GitHub to some of these other FOSS alternatives, but I think it's called like the media mass problem or something, but what you're referring to, where just having your community in one place, I mean, that momentum is so much to overcome. So like it feels difficult to have the conversation of this large issue we're trying to tackle when we're asking individuals to sort of like make an effort to solve a systemic problem.
Yeah.
So we really want to be conscious about how that affects communities. And so, yeah, I do just want to reiterate that your communities, and so we trust you to make those decisions.
So GitHub itself is open source, right?
Well, Git is open source.
Right.
So yeah, do you want to get into
Git
more of
is
the
open
detail
source,
there?
Yeah, Git is open source, which is really nice because that means that your repositories, you can move over to Gitsy, to GitLab, to Codeberg, SourceSite, to all these other places, which is really easy. The GitHub interface is not, and so that's all proprietary. There's a bunch of proprietary features built on top of Git, which does make it harder to leave. So like wikis and issues are really hard to export. That's one problem. Another problem that we've been hearing more as we've been going into this process is that GitHub has had a lot of work done as far as its accessibility of interface goes. And a lot of these free software alternatives are really lacking in accessibility options. So it does feel negligent to sort of talk about this sort of mass migration without acknowledging that there is this huge upside to having really accessible options, both from a financial aspect and from a usability aspect. So that's something that we're really tracking and hoping to get some money to be able to put some money into development for accessibility for the other platforms.
So it seems that the first step would be to create a really good alternative to GitHub.
Right. So GitLab is sort of the one that people point to as sort of a feature by feature parity kind of equivalent. There's a couple different tiers. So there's the Enterprise Edition, which I think was the one that was linked, and then the Community Edition. The Community Edition is free software. The Enterprise Edition has their own kind of special sauce wrapped up into it, and then you pay for that. There's also options like Codeberg, which is built on Gitty. So those have some really nice interfaces. But again, when you're competing with such a enterprise scale software like GitHub, it's going to be hard to even get feature parity and all those other things. So yeah, there's huge trade-offs between these programs, and accessibility is one aspect, feature parity is another. I think community is the biggest one, is just getting enough community. So one of the features we really like with some of these other free alternatives is that they're building in federation. So once you get federation, then that's sort of more akin to like how Mastodon has been slowly replacing Twitter in some respects, which we're big fans of.
Yeah, I think it's important to sort of keep an eye on what everyone else is doing too, because I think if you can get enough people in mass to be like, no, we won't stand for this and move somewhere else, then it makes sense for us to be part of that movement too, because what we want to be is when everyone else is. And I think everyone's probably having that same like, what's everyone else doing kind of moment, because there are a lot of projects that probably benefit just from everybody being in the same place. If everybody moved somewhere else, then it wouldn't matter. We would still get the same benefit that we get now from being on GitHub. But
So
it's
then
hard.
it should be, once you have a good place to move to, then there should be a broadcast of a move day, move week, when everybody says, okay, it's time to jump.
Yeah, I think there's that. I think one thing I'm working with a few projects right now, and I'd really just like to document in real time all of the successes and failures and stumbling and the roadblocks on the way of getting off, talking about some of the pain points of moving off of a proprietary system into a free system. You're not going to get everything that you want. You're going to have to make some compromises. And I think that demonstrating that and that part of the nuance will really both catalyze people to move, because it'll be demonstrated that projects are doing it, but also bring to light some of the pain points of just where the free software movement is lagging behind. But yeah, I think it would be cool to say in 1 year from the day we announced, that's the day we're all going to do it. That's some optimism.
Why do you say that it's too difficult to get parity with what exists?
Well, I mean, just resource-wise, you need to think about how much money GitHub has for software development of their platform compared to the resources that are being put into the free alternatives. SourceHut, which is an option, it's more that patch email workflow that has been that's used by the kernel community and some other projects. That's written by one person. Codeberg is run by a couple people. So when it comes to just the amount of resources being put into software development, I think the free software platforms are an order at least of magnitude behind when it comes to development.
I want to just throw some facts or some statistics into this discussion, which is because I don't know how we compare to other sort of SFC member projects. But I can totally imagine that some software, free software projects are a project. We have over 900 GitHub repositories. We're in a sense a community of, we're not just one project. Backdrop is a project, and then we've got 900 sub-projects that are maintained by over 100 different people. We have, in our core issue queue, we have 2.3 thousand open issues. We're approaching 6,000 total issues, including closed issues, which now the numbers themselves may not matter if the right tools are there to move them. But I think the numbers matter if the right tools aren't there. For example, if we can't easily move our issue queues, and we've got 2,000 open issues, some of which have been open for 5 years and have a history behind them, that's a lot to walk away from. So anyways.
Yeah, another thing too about the community aspect is that those issues that have been open have comments from individual users. And so we would also want all of those users to have accounts on the other system so they could still get credit for participating in the conversations. And so like just moving a comment thread over, if it's got 30 people in it on one issue, presents a problem, and multiply that by 2,300, or if we wanted to keep our history, which is also something that's really useful for us now, 6,000. Yeah, there's a lot of complication there.
Exactly.
For sure.
Yeah, just
And
the
that's just
tracking
core.
users across systems is a really hard problem. So I linked the mailing list where we've got some discussion and people talking about some of the migratory issues and that kind of thing. But yeah, just even giving people credit from GitHub in a repository on another platform is sort of an open problem. If you're using a bunch of different email addresses, unifying that and giving people credit that's sort of an unsolved problem. And yeah, so I did check, and I think that Backdrop might have more GitHub repositories than the rest of Software Freedom Conservancy projects combined, which is cool. Like, you're making use of the platform. And so I think that like knowing GitHub and knowing how your community uses it is a benefit. So like I don't think that we want to say you're the biggest, so it's most important for you to give it up. I think that it's almost better in a sense to say you're a very productive user of this tool, so better than most about how it's used in a variety of community settings.
Yeah, but I do think that each community probably uses it in slightly different ways. And I think that, like we don't use the wikis very much, and just the way our community tends to operate. There's some wiki pages out there, but they're not collaborative documentation in the way that other projects use them. And there are probably other issues that or other projects that like don't use the issue queue the way we do. They might use it as like a to-do list for one developer, whereas with us, it's really a place for conversation, sort of a different way of handling it. And so I would imagine that every project moving off is probably going to have a unique set of complications in their exit strategy, because like if wikis don't come over, it's not really a big deal for us. We'll just find some other way to do it. Whereas other projects maybe don't care so much if their issues don't come over. They're like, it's fine, clean slate, we'll start over. So yeah, I think different priorities for each project would change that a lot too.
Right, and I think that also brings to light sort of one of the problems and why we think it's important to move, which is that like when we're all rely upon one proprietary system, we do need to match our workflows to what's available there. So I think that like in this abstract sense, that's something that we are looking to the FOSS options to sort of liberate us from. But also people are really robust and versatile and will figure out creative ways to do things. I just saw there's a grant maker that's using GitHub to submit your grant proposals, and that's fitting in maybe a circle peg into a square hole or something like that. So
I looked at the 900 repos and I think about how one might make the argument that like we could never change because of that, but it occurred to me as you started talking today, Pono, that the risk is the other way as well, which is that if, for example, Microsoft decides to suddenly that they're going to start charging per repo at some point in the future, our risk is much higher if we don't think about if we don't have a backup plan, right? So even if we aren't able to move, it might be a prudent thing for us to be thinking about, well, what happens if we have to move at some point? And if nothing else, maybe your campaign is giving us reason to think about that.
I will say one of the things that I really respect about Backdrop is the use of Zulip. I think that not being on Slack is huge. I think that being on an open chat platform means that you do have some sense of where your community is. So even if you were cut off from that, that's really huge. There's so many projects, so many free software projects that are being developed on proprietary chat systems, and that's something that really scares me. So I'm really like happy that platform exists.
Thanks, Tim.
So, well, it wasn't. I didn't do that, but I was part of it.
You were a very vocal advocate for moving to Zulip. So
Well, there was a group of us. Yeah, so I mean, in general, I think we try to think about, how to the larger free software community when we make decisions, but we're not as embedded in it or as connected as maybe other projects are. In some ways, sometimes I feel like we're off on our own, and I'm speaking for myself here. Jen might feel differently, but I do feel sometimes like I wish we were more connected in some ways to the broader, and maybe that might, if other people are done with this topic, it might be a segue to talk about some other things, other ways that we could be working with the SFC. Because, for example, one of the things I've been talking about for a while is I don't go to any free software conferences, for example, other than Backdrop or Drupal conferences. And for a long time, I've felt like I should, because I think I'd have a lot to gain and learn from that. But I haven't, and I need to figure that out. And so, some of it is just being aware of what the options are, because to be honest, most of them don't come across my desk. I often learn about the opportunities after they've happened, or when I'm seeing all the tweets in the middle of them, right? That somebody's at an event. I've also thought about, as a member of the project management committee, is how valuable it would be to talk to other sort of project leaders or project managers about these kinds of issues. In a direct way, and which could happen, I suppose, at a big open source conference, but it might also happen in a conference like we're doing right now, a virtual conference that's sort of targeted at, not the whole community, but targeted at the maintainers. And those events probably exist, but I don't know about them.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really good thing. I think that is one place that Conservancy could do a lot better, is getting our member projects to talk to each other. There's a lot that sort of we gate that there could be a lot of trading of information between projects. So yeah, I think that two of the things that are on my plate that I'm hoping to get up pretty soon are, one is a member project handbook for advice on governance and reimbursement and these kind of things, but also just a chat room for member projects to talk to each other. I think that you're right, that like there's so much information in the free software and so much community there, but just tapping into it is sort of, we are all in our own silos. There's Zulip and there's IRC, and then there's all these places, and so there is sort of just this fragmentation that's happening. And I think I think you're really right to bring up that's something we could do better.
I wonder if it might be valuable. So like, we would be happy to set aside an SFC slot at every Backdrop Live. It doesn't mean you have to be here, but we could invite other member projects if they wanted to drop in and just talk about things like governance and accounting or whatever, things that affect open source projects. I think that would be good. But it might be better, rather than having it like a specific Backdrop Live event, do something like OSCON, right? Where it would be not just SFC projects, but it could be like anyone who's an open source software leadership person in whatever role that is, could attend and have some sort of a structured conversation about it there too. And that might be something that like Tim and I would find out about OSCON, right? Because there's this dedicated spot there specifically for that sort of thing. So that could be something.
Yeah. Unfortunately, OSCON is no more. O'Reilly has canceled OSCON.
Oh no, permanently?
Yeah, because of the pandemic. So there's kind of
I thought that was temporary.
Right, especially in North America. I think we don't have a lot of free software conferences. There's FOSDEM in Europe, but like then you got to get to Belgium. And so yeah, I think that you're right. I think that there's a lot of these conversations happening among the OSPOs and among the corporate channels that are doing their own sort of big money open source. But I think that the sort of smaller project governance, let's talk and build community, I think that is a space that would be really, really valuable to a lot of people. So yeah, I would love to see those kind of things pop up. And yeah, I mean, like hallway tracks at conferences were always the place where you get your best ideas. So yep. Encouraging that kind of thing is a great idea.
Yep.
Well, I would be willing to talk about doing a Backdrop Live type event for this audience if you ever wanted to collaborate on that. But anyways, what else? So Yeah, on that particular, so that would be useful. Another thing that I have thought about the idea of doing a diversity intern for a long time. And I've assumed that there's probably programs out there that we could work with if we wanted to do that. Now, I haven't talked about it a lot with Jen and other members. It's an idea that's been in my head that I might have mentioned from time to time, but it's not really been on our agenda yet. But I'm bringing this up, one, because I had no idea that I was so close to a possible source. If we were interested in doing that, I had no idea that you guys were involved in a project like that. And I think if we had, we might have started talking about this sooner, or I might certainly have brought it up because I had a possible solution. Right now, it seems like I wouldn't even know how to go about it. So why even talk about it? So what can you tell us anything more about that sort of diversity intern thing? Because I mean, again,
Yeah.
I'll just go, let me say one more thing and then you can talk. In case Jen is scratching her head and wondering what I'm talking about, my idea would be that, you know, maybe we did a fundraising drive or something to raise funds to hire an intern through a program like the one you seem to be talking about, to work on some particular issues within the queue or something. I don't know, that we identify some priority, maybe the kinds of things that volunteers are less likely to have time for, and that having an intern focus on them might help them get done. Anyway, so that's just a really wild idea that we haven't talked about, but how would that work, and how could you help us if we were interested?
Yeah. So we've had a lot of conservancy projects that have participated in Outreachy. So Outreachy has had over 40 communities and 85 individual software projects that interns have worked on. But the goal is to sort of pair up an intern and then get them embedded in a community. So they're getting mentorship, they're getting connected, they're working on their technical skills, their non-technical skills. So yeah, we should absolutely talk about that. We've had a lot of luck with projects, with conservancy projects participating in Outreachy. And then there's also Google Summer of Code, which is another thing. But yeah, we would love to get Backdrop involved with Outreachy.
Well, I don't know if other people like this idea, but I'm intrigued by it. And I think we have a community that would support an intern, that we have some skilled developers who like to help beginners, and that we would be able to provide, you know, that it would be very much a two-way street where we could support and, you know, and provide guidance and mentorship towards an intern. But I need to talk, you know, we need to talk as a community about that. That's just my idea right now.
Of course.
Yeah. Anyways, does anybody else have, Kevin or Robert or, well, Sarvashri, have any questions for Pono or any of us?
The only thing I'm thinking about is there's these other tools that are part of GitHub that don't exist anywhere else. So then there should be software projects to replicate that functionality so that it's available in an open source format. And
Yeah.
seems like there needs to be some fundraising from somewhere, and I don't know where that money would come from, but there must be someone who has an interest in open source that would maybe fund those things. You're saying corporations, businesses are funding open source projects if it's to their benefit. And if it's true that all of a sudden Microsoft could start charging for things that people are using that would severely impact open source projects, then working on alternatives would be a good idea for all those people to participate in. People who would be affected, including businesses.
Sure.
Maybe those businesses could be approached to fund the open source development of compatible tools that are missing in Git that exist in GitHub. Seems like there was some mistake a long time ago when someone decided to make GitHub proprietary. and people didn't object back then.
Yeah, you bring up a lot of really good points. To just touch on one little part of it is, and I don't know if Backdrop is making use of this feature, but the free CI, so continuous integration, that GitHub provides allows you to run tests totally automated. And I know that I would have what I would have done to have that at the beginning of my software development career, I would have given an arm and a leg for that. And this is sort of a free thing that you get. That's one thing. So I think that you're right that trying to figure out which companies are using this and trying to see if we could get them to help fund development of this. Right now, we're really fortunate that there are some organizations. We work with the OSU, the Oregon State University Open Source Lab, and they're working on building out a replacement for this kind of feature for GitLab. So this is like one place where we've been able to direct some money to an organization to replace, a little bit of it to replicate the functionality that's over there.
Do you happen to know if that's what Drupal's using for their testing on GitLab? Irina would know.
I don't think Drupal's using the OSL, but I think they are using those like, I think they call them GitLab runners for CI.
Okay.
So
Yeah,
Drupal is using-
we do rely heavily on the GitHub continuous integration tools to run our tests. We do it for every pull request to make sure that they're still not breaking anything in core. And we run it on 3 different versions of PHP, I think so. And we've split it up into a bunch of different tests, so that I think they give us like a maximum of 10 runners. We're using like 9 of them with every pull request. So yeah, and it's free, which is amazing. Before we used Travis CI, and they gave us an open source account, which was great, but we were like hitting the limits of what they could do for us. It was really slow, and we had to like optimize all of our tests to make it work there. And then it was like, wait a minute, we can get this on GitHub. And so we moved everything over. Yeah. So I hadn't even considered that as being one of the add-ons that we rely on so heavily from GitHub. This is the kind of thing where do you know if there's like a checklist for moving off of GitLab? It's like, do you use any of the following features? And you have to be like, yes,
Yeah.
no, and then that would help you know where to go. Or
yeah, we've started building out a matrix for these are the features, these are the ones we can currently replace, these are the ones we're working on replacing, these are the ones that just work out of the box, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's great.
And then also, like, I'd like to build in, and this is what it would cost you to move, which sort of like, we do want people to have a realistic sense of the kind of resourcing that they're getting for free. And this kind of subsidized cost is like, such a boon to projects that it's really hard to ask people to spend their own limited resources to do that. So yeah, but the CI is a huge one right now. So that's a problem that I've been working on for the past like 3 or 4 years, is how to get better CI for projects. But when it comes down to it, it's a resource problem of who's going to pay for the computer to run the tests. My laptop can run it, but like we want everybody to be able to make pull requests. So like, if people are submitting patches, then we'd like the tests to be run too.
Yeah. Another thing that
Drupal is using GitLab and not GitHub.
Yeah. Another thing that we found really valuable is the fact that we can have people contribute to our project using the edit interface on GitHub, so they don't need to worry about setting up a local environment, because they can change the code, file a pull request. The pull request opens a sandbox where they get a fresh install of Backdrop with their changes on it, and runs all of the tests. And so we don't even need people to have local development environments anymore. We can have people contribute by writing code and then testing in the sandboxes, and all of that is using the I don't know if the CI is leveraging Tugboat, but there's some kind of integration there that makes that all possible. But the edit interface is something too that I don't think.
So Acquia and Drupal are not needing to use the kinds of features in GitHub that you're using?
So
GitLab. Oh, go ahead, Jen.
I was going to say that Drupal already had built all of their solutions before GitHub existed. So they already had an issue queue, they already had a test system, they already had a process for all of this. They don't have all of the features that GitHub has, but they've created a workflow around it. And so when they moved to GitLab, they only brought the list of like, this is our set of requirements, this is what we have currently, and they're making sure that maps to what they're getting from GitLab. But it's not a map to everything that GitHub has, because they've never needed all of the same features that are there. So they were able to get most of what they needed and are working on the differences.
So would they be interested in creating these features? You know, Acquia has money to work with. Would they be interested in improving this so that they would have a better tool?
I think they are already investing in Drupal's implementation on GitLab. I'm not sure how much of that is turning into an open source alternative or how much of it is direct integration for the Drupal project. So, it's really easy to create tools. It's really easy to create a direct integration for your custom system, but it's really hard to create a public tool to solve the need for the custom integration of your system. So I don't know exactly where that is getting split up currently and where they're spending their money. But I do know that Acquia is investing a significant amount in that. I know the Drupal Association is investing it, and they're a different funding source. And I'm not sure there's more money to go around from what they're currently investing in stuff.
And I think it's important to know that they just took like 2 years to decide on using GitLab, like about 2 years ago or 3 years ago, right? So they, it would probably be pretty hard for them to turn around and move or do something different right now, because they went through a long process to find an alternative. They settled on GitHub, and that was really just about 3 years ago, I think.
They settled on GitLab.
GitLab, I'm sorry. They settled on GitLab.
So they have an interest in evolving that system since they've bought into it.
Yeah.
Right. But like Jen pointed out, one of the problems is that like, even if GitLab supports it, you're going to build your own workflow around that. So even if they have invested, a lot of it is going to be personal to them, which is just sort of an unfortunate problem that all projects will have. It's really hard. Right now, there's not really an open standard for this kind of testing suite. So since people did so much development on GitHub, sort of the ways that people are even thinking about the problem are shaped by that. So we don't even have open standards for running tests or doing this kind of continuous integration, which is, again, part of that larger abstract problem of centralizing resources.
Hadn't even occurred to me that there's no standard to build against.
I've been advocating
GitHub
for
is no
years that we should
standard.
be going back to using make files. You just put a make file in your repository, but no.
There you go. 9i files, why not? Yeah.
But yeah, Surya, I think that's a really good point, that like trying to figure out these lever points of what companies are doing the most general development and kind of knowing where to push to make those resources more public. I think that's something that we'd love to find more about.
Okay, this might be a good time for us to go ahead and at least end the recording. We could continue chatting for a minute, but we're almost done anyways. So let's break the recording right now at a clean spot.